Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the book of Isaiah. This is session 13. The title is God Restores. The text is Isaiah 65, verse 17 through 25. And the lesson summary statement is the one true God promises to restore His creation for His people through His Son. There was a man that was walking along the beach. He saw a lamp that was partly covered in sand. He picked it up and brushed off the sand, and out popped a genie. The genie said, "I'll give you 3 wishes." The man said, "I want $10 million in my checking account." Poof, instantly he was a multimillionaire. He said, "I want a fancy new sports car." And poof, he instantly had the latest and fanciest, most expensive sports car. And he said, "For my 3rd wish, I want to be loved by women." Poof, the genie turned him into a box of chocolates. Well, if you were given 3 wishes, what are some of the things that you would wish for? And that's how I'd start the class, with a bad joke. But you'll notice as people give their wishes, that what their wishes revolve around is a better day. The people of God were in exile as a result of being disciplined for their disobedience and having abandoned God. And they were looking for a better day. And Isaiah shares with them the reason for them to have real hope, because God was bringing a better day. We've come to the study of our book of Isaiah. And so just very briefly, let me give you an overview of the book as we've come to it. And as I've mentioned in other studies, I'm using an outline from Dr. John Oswalt. Chapters 1 to 6 talks about the problem with God's people and the solution that's found in the prophet. The people are a people of unclean lips. That is, their heart is disobedient and rebellious towards God. And the solution is for the nation to have an experience like the prophet in chapter 6, where he stands before a holy God. He confesses his sin. He's repentant. God cleanses him, and he yields to God to serve God. That's what the nation needs to have, that same kind of experience with God. The problem is they don't trust God. So from chapter 7 to chapters 39, the big word is trust. The basis of servanthood is trust. And he takes them on this tour of 2 kings, Ahaz, who fails to trust God, and Hezekiah, who does trust God. He also speaks to them about the nations surrounding them, and they need to stop trusting the nations, and they need to start trusting God. He introduces a servant who does trust God. He's their hope. And then you come to chapters 40 to chapters 55, and the key word there is grace. And in chapter 40 to chapter 48, he talks about the motive. The motive of God is grace towards his people, because he says to them he's still going to use them to deliver the message of God to the nations. But they're such a disobedient people. Why would God use these people? Because he has grace towards them. And then in chapters 49 to 55, it brings up the issue of deliverance. Getting them out of Babylon is going to take a great power to do that. Only God's power can do that. Normally, nations are absorbed and they go into extinction. How is it that God's going to preserve the Jewish people and use them to be a message? Well, he's going to do that by bringing through them a servant, a divine warrior who will conquer sin. He is going to deal with their sin and through their discipline in Babylon, but he's going to bring them out and through them bring this divine warrior, and that's going to be the means of grace. His motive is to use these people, and the only reason he's using them is because of grace. His means is through these people, this divine warrior. And we saw that in that section there were these servant songs that Isaiah spoke about. In chapters 56 to 66, we're talking about the character of the servant, and that is righteousness. he is right with God. Now, how does God prove to the nations that he is God alone? He does it through his creative power. His creative power is displayed in that he remakes us and he remakes the world. And this world is made into something like we've never experienced before. And there's only God that has the power to do this. And this will draw the world to the one true Savior and the one true God. Now in this text, chapter 65, verse 17 to 25, it's really the culmination of these chapters that it's driving at, this new heaven and this new earth. And so we have, first of all, a description of this new heaven and new earth, and it is a place of joy, verse 17 to 20. The one true God promises to restore his creation for his people through faith in his Son. I'm going to say to the class, as I read through verse 17 to 20, would you look for the elements that stand out the most to you? And after I've read the text and I'll solicit their responses, that'll give me an opportunity for us to discuss the fuller meaning of the various things that they mention. And then I'm also going to tell them at the conclusion of that, let's start a list as we go through this text. And on one side, let's list the things that will no longer happen in the new heaven and the new earth. And a list for the things that God promises will be in the new heaven and the new earth. And so we'll again look at the text and say, what are the things that will no longer happen, and what are the things that, the new things that will be in heaven that God promises us. And we'll just, as we go through the text, we'll add to this list. And then after we've done that, looking at the text again, I'm going to ask the class, now how does this help me on Monday? Knowing these things, how does this help me? And if I could maybe prime the pump with you and thinking about this, let's just say that you're planning a trip to some place that you're very excited to arrive. You're looking forward so much to go to this destination. So what kind of actions do you need to take now to prepare for your arrival there at this destination that you're excited about? There may be things like, well, you're going to have to save some money. You may have to get in shape. It maybe involve some walking and hiking. Maybe you keep a good attitude because there will be some bumps along the way that will make it difficult to prepare and to get to that destination. There's just all kinds of suggestions. And so my point is how does the fact that we know we're going to this place that's full of joy, how does that affect the way we live now? What does it do about our priorities? What's important? How does it impact our perseverance in living out the Christian life? What does it mean that we're going to be one time, and in short order, we're going to be at a place where there's just this wonderful fullness of joy and fulfillment? How does that help me right now in the wounds and the hurts and the grudges that I have in the way people have treated me? And what about my attitude towards myself in terms of self-pity and those kinds of things? I hope you see what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say that the fact that that's going to be my reality and it's going to be for eternity ought to have an impact on the way I view things, the perspective I have about life, and how I respond to life now. Really, are the things that people have done to me that one day I will no longer remember, or it'll no longer have any sting to it, how should that help me now? What kind of perspective do I put that in? Not to diminish that, but just to respond to it in a healthy way. Now let me just point some things out to you about the text that might be helpful as you look at it with your class. It says, "For I will create a new heaven and a new earth." That word create is also found in Genesis 1:1 when it said God created the heavens and the earth. This word is always associated and only associated with God. So God does this new work of a new heaven and a new earth. The past events will not be remembered or come to mind. The past events are a reference to the sorrows, the old order that has created hurt in our life. And he says they'll not be remembered. That is, there'll not be this consciousness of the content of those things. And this phrase, "come to mind," means there's not going to be something in this new heaven and new earth that's going to remind us of those memories of pain in the past. The awareness of a total newness without any prompting is going to result in this wonderful sense of fullness of joy. He says in verse 18, "Then be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating." The word "then," it's said in a way that's a strong contrast. This is going to go, but this is what it's going to be like. Then be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I will create Jerusalem to be a joy and its people to be a delight. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. Do you notice how often the word glad and rejoice and joy and delight are found in this text? I mean, it's just filled with it. These are also written in an imperative, and it means this is something that needs to start now and go on forever. You don't have to wait till that day. You can start rejoicing in what's going on. And the doubling of these words, glad and rejoice and joy and delight, rejoice and be glad. Again, it's another way of emphasizing this joy that's going to be coming. The last part says, "The sound of weeping and crying will no longer be heard." So you see, something's going to be forever. That's gladness and rejoicing. And then there's something that's never going to happen again, weeping and crying. Those things that cause sorrow. The word worry or weeping refers to felt pain, and the word crying means inflicted pain. So both the emotion and the cause of that sorrow are gone. It's just it's unimaginable what this new heaven and this new earth is going to be like. And it says, God says in verse 19, "I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people." It's saying that God takes such joy in us. Why is that? Because the things that caused us tears, the things that caused us to groan and be distressed, are forever gone. And what follows in the examples of the next verses is everything of this world, this fallen world that hurts us, is removed. You're going to see, it's going to talk about untimely death, futile work, impermanence, upheaval, children born to tragedy. All those things are removed. It's using examples to say, this is what the new heaven is. And when God looks upon that, and that upon us, and those things are hurting us that are gone, it fills him with joy. I thought about a groom as he's watching his bride come to him. It seems as though everything is right with the world. That single moment, he is captivated and his life is full of joy. I think about new parents, and that baby has just arrived and been placed into their hands, and everything is right in this world. And it just seems to me that God is trying to picture for us that something that's so very beautiful in terms of the fullness of joy. So there's a place full of joy. This is what this new heaven and this new earth will be like. The one true God promises to restore his creation for his people through his Son, through faith in his Son. The second point is a place of prosperity, verse 21 to 23. And I'm going to say to the class, as I read through verse 21 to 23, I'm going to give you some background to the verses so that you have a fuller understanding of the beautiful picture that Isaiah is presenting. And then I want us to add to our list, what are the items that will no longer exist, and what are some of the new promises that we're going to give. And so let me just go through that. You'll see in verse 21, there are two positive statements. People will build houses and live in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. And then there are negative counterparts to that. And that's to highlight those positives. They will not build and others live in them. They will not plant and others eat. This goes back to the covenant that God made with the people before they entered the promised land. And he told them if they would be obedient to him, they would be able to live in their houses and they would plant vineyards and be able to enjoy the fruit of those vineyards. If they disobeyed him, then others would live in their houses and others would enjoy their fruit. Now, these people had known war much of their history, and so they knew what it meant to be driven from their homes and to have their vines, their resources taken from them. And there's a reason why Isaiah picked the idea of a vine. It takes time, my understanding, in order to grow grapevines. You can grow a crop of wheat in a season, but in order to produce vines that are productive and fruitful, that takes time to do that. And so he is saying what's going to happen is there's going to be a stability and a fulfillment in this. It goes on to say, for my people's lives will be like the lifetime of a tree. My chosen ones will fully enjoy the work of their hands. It's a picture of durability and longevity. It's a picture of security and fulfillment. Think about it. To the Jewish people, to the people of that day, something that showed an enduring quality was a tree. There's a tree at my grandparents' farm in southeast Oklahoma that still stands, and it has a lot of history around that tree. That tree was there for my great-grandfather and my grandfather. It was there for my mother, and it's there for me. And when my grandchildren go down there, it's still standing. It's this powerful picture of longevity and endurance and stability. And then he says in that last part, my chosen ones will fully enjoy the work of their hands. It's talking about complete satisfaction. In verse 23, he recaps verse 21 and 22, and he adds a further reason why these happy conditions will prevail. They will not labor without success or bear children destined for disaster, for they will be a people blessed by the Lord along with their descendants. The children destined for disaster. Someone said that when you have a son born, pray that your nation is not at war 18 years later. And of course, they had a very high child death rate in those days. And then there would be tragedies along the way, of course. And it's saying these things will not be. They will not see tragedy touch their loved ones. And all of this is possible because they belong to the family that is blessed by God. Now, this idea of full prosperity, a place of prosperity. Let me give a suggestion about how I was trying to get at this in this text. I was going to ask my class, when you were a young man or woman getting started in your vocation, or when you were newly married, did you have some financial struggles? And people were are very free to share with you the financial struggles they had early on in their marriage or when they were first getting started. And what were some of those difficulties? And what did you learn from that time? And people tend to speak of those things kind of in glowing terms. And then comes this question: do you want to go back there? Well, I don't know anybody that really wants to go back to those difficult times. And what this text is talking about is we're going to have a time of stability, a time of fulfillment. And this time is like those early days in young adulthood or in marriage where we struggled through some times. We're grateful for them, for the things they've taught us, but we don't want to go back there. These are the good old days at this time. Or maybe someone's having that struggle right now. And the promise that's being held out to them is the promise of stability, security, and fulfillment. You might even want to ask, what's been the most enjoyable thing that you've participated in? Is it a hobby or is it work? It's just something that you want to do. You don't necessarily have to be paid to do it. Well, this is talking about a time in which people will have that kind of fulfillment, a time of prosperity. And then last of all, a place of peace. Did you have, it says, the one true God promises to restore his creation for his people through faith in his Son, a place of peace. And again, let's continue to add to our list. What are the things that won't exist, and what are the new promises that God makes to us? And then you could read through the text. I'll just point out a couple of things about the text. Notice the flow. First of all, there is this perfect communication with God. See what he says in verse 24? Even before they call, I will answer. And while they are still speaking, I will hear. This word that seems to unify these verses 24 and 25, is the word oneness. There's such a oneness between the worshiper and God that what he prays for, what he requests, is exactly what God wants to give him. And God hears his need before he even asks it. That kind of communication, that kind of unity and oneness, the worshiper is going to have with God. Right now, we have 100 things that interrupt and confuse our prayer life, but a day's coming in which you're going to know what pleases God, and he's going to be answering those prayers. And then that also is reflected in relationships with others. You'll notice the wolf and the lamb will feed together. There's something fundamentally changed about the nature of the wolf and the lamb, and there's this oneness. And the lion will eat straw like cattle. Again, there's this fundamental change in his nature, but there is something that doesn't change. The only point of creation where there is no change is the curse pronounced on sin. Notice, but the serpent's food will be dust. They will not do what is evil or destroy my entire holy mountain, says the Lord. That phrase, holy mountain, is a reference to God dwelling in the midst of his people. That's not going to be harmed. Now, I've known this is an idea that when you get right with God, you begin to have the potential to live right with others. God calls us to be at peace with him, and then he calls us to be peacemakers, to be right with others. Now, I've known some amazing things happen in people's lives when they got right with God, in terms of how God worked in their life to make them right and at peace with others. And these people are my heroes. I've known people who grew up in an alcoholic family, and they had serious issues in their life because of an alcoholic father. But they got right with God, and God began to work in their hearts until they were able to make peace with their father. and it did wonderful good for their lives. I know of others who was sexually abused by a stepdad, and they got right with God, and God began to work in their heart in such an amazing, graceful way that they were able to actually extend forgiveness to this man that had so violated them. What had to happen between them and God so they could forgive those who sinned against them? That's my question to you. What had to happen? What did God have to do in their heart so that they would be able to live at peace with people who had wounded and violated and broken trust with them in such fashion? Well, this is a place where you're at perfect peace with God. And this means you'll put aside all that keeps you from living at peace with others. Would that not be heaven? And this is what God speaks of in this new heaven and this new earth. The way I'd like to close my lesson is going to give them copies of the lyrics of the song Peace in the Valley. It's written by Tommy Dorsey. And I'm going to ask them to read through the lyrics of Peace in the Valley and just share with me what are the things that stand out, the beautiful thing that's being said in this song, Peace in the Valley. And then I'm going to ask them, well, when you look over that text, is there any additional insight or richness you see in this song when you realize that this song was written in 1937 in the heart of the Great Depression? What adds meaning to this song when you understand that? And then, after they've responded to that, I'm going to say, well, in addition to the song being written in 1937, what does it add to the testimony of this song to know that the person who wrote it, Tommy Dorsey, was an African American, and he wrote the song for an African American, Mahalia Jackson, to sing? And these people are talking about peace in the valley. They're looking to a day in which the old divisions of humanity and the great deprivations of human life are gone, and there's peace. And the only reason that someone could write a song like that and it would be taken serious is because the one true God promises to restore his creation for his people through faith in his Son. If you don't know the Son, come to him. There's a plan of salvation in the front of your personal study guide that will help explain how you can be a part of the family of God and spend eternity in the new heaven and the new earth. God bless you, friend. Thank you for joining. I'm looking forward to us studying the Gospel of Luke, the first 9 chapters, beginning the first Sunday in December. Take care.